This is the Lutz family after they cashed out on all the money that
money. Welcome back, guys. It's us again, Emma,
Siobhan.
Today we are going to be talking about part 2 of the Amityville horror, where we get into the Lutz family and their claims as to the paranormal activity that they encountered in the Amityville house just a little over a year after the DeFeo murders. First off, before we get into it, I would just like to say that if you haven't seen our first video about the DeFeo murders, please watch that first and then come back to our video. I'm going to be putting a link in the description below, so be sure to check it out. It's a good one. You don't want to miss it, and it gives you some insight before we get into the Lutz info that we're going to be talking about today. Also, another reminder, our channel is mostly about true crime and the paranormal, so if you have any interest in any of those things, feel free to consider subscribing with us today, because we're going to be doing a lot of cool stuff in the future, a lot of like paranormal investigating as well, so be sure to subscribe if that's something that interests you.
And please leave any questions down below if you want us to answer any of those. Or just make snarky remarks at you, we can do that too.
Without further ado, I guess we're just gonna go ahead and start talking about the Lutz Hauntings. Let's get started. So, Kathy and George Lutz, they got married in July of 1975 and decided to look for a new home to stay in. That is when they stumbled upon a beautiful 1920s Dutch colonial in Amityville, New York. Gee, I wonder what house this is. Upon the Amityville horror house. It did have it disclosed that the house was where these horrific murders took place. Kathy and George discuss it on their own, and they decide that it's fine, they don't mind the history of the house, and that they're going to move in. So they end up moving in on December 18th, 1975. When they first move in, George got some advice from a friend, and they said, listen, like, this obviously was the place of like such a horrific and tragic event. You should probably have the place blessed before your family moves in. Enter Father Ralph. George contacts Father Ralph to come in and bless the place as they are moving in. And he is going room by room throughout the house and blessing each room. He enters this room and he immediately claims that he felt very uneasy, felt like a darker presence in this room, and he claims that he heard a deep masculine voice say, "Get out," right behind his shoulder, and he also claims that he was slapped by an invisible force in this back room. He did not tell them immediately about it, and he ended up actually leaving the home and waiting until he got back to his own home to call the Lutzes and tell them about what had happened, and they said, do not ever use that back room as a bedroom. I just feel something really negative in there. Like, I would not suggest using it as a bedroom. So they ended up using it as a sewing room during their time there.
Thank God. I thought you were gonna be like, they ended up using it as a bedroom.
Also, just as they were moving in, another thing that happened was the dog almost accidentally hung itself on the fence outside the house. Apparently what happened was his leash ended up getting stuck on one of the fences, and he was hanging from this fence and he couldn't breathe, and luckily they were able to get to him, but that was another odd occurrence that happened just within hours of them moving in.
Just don't hurt the dog. Like, that's all I want. Don't hurt the dog.
Don't hurt the puppy.
No, seriously.
He ends up okay in the end. He makes it through the 28 days.
I know, thank God. I can't deal with that.
As I said, they had a bunch of different activity happening, and eventually after 28 days, they flee the house never to go back again for any of their possessions, any of their belongings, anything like that. Now, I'm going to go into their first set of claims, because there was a magazine article that was released very early on, where like they discussed what was happening in the house, and it was a lot of poltergeist activity. And for those of you who don't know like exactly what a poltergeist is, they make their presence known through movement and sound. So a lot of times with poltergeist, you're never actually going to see like an actual apparition. Like a lot of times what happens is like the doors will shut on their own, or like things will move around, or like you'll hear weird noises or hear voices or like things like that, but you won't actually see like an actual apparition. So in this first magazine article, they were saying things of that nature. So George Lutz claimed that he would wake up every morning at 3:15, which was when the DeFeo murders were said to have taken place. There's a piece of evidence about a red room in the basement that it's very interesting because it's not in the original like blueprint for the house, and it was boarded up, and it was this like small little room to the side that was like infested with flies. All that stuff, like the whole house they were saying was infested. They said the dog won't go near it, and like people just got bad vibes from it. So there was a house on the Amityville property before this like 1920s Dutch colonial. And I think this is a key bit of information. So the house that was there prior to the Dutch colonial, it was from the 1700s. They said that they moved this house to the other side of town to build this new one. But yeah, so the basement and the foundation of the Amityville house is from another house. So it wasn't like it was made with this new house. So it's interesting because this home is actually connected to another home. And those were the first Amityville claims being made there. William Weber, he was the attorney for Ronald DeFeo Jr. And he ended up reaching out to see if he could hear their accounts as to what was going on in the house, to see if it could help with Ronald DeFeo Jr. Because remember, this was just a little over a year after the murders, so all of the trial stuff was still going on as this was happening.
I also think Weber, his lawyer, besides just helping him out, I think had a lot of ulterior motives because his case got so much attention to write his own book and stuff. So I think I'm just gonna throw that out there. I think he had some ulterior motives too.
George and Kathy decided to meet with William Weber. Now, when they met with William Weber, they had a bunch of photos going into a lot more detail about what was going on than the initial magazine article. So they were claiming that there was goo oozing from the walls, that there were flies everywhere. They took photos of the goo and the flies so that they could show him in person, and like a bunch of different photos of the house. They were claiming that like the doors were coming off their hinges, all that kind of stuff, and they brought him all like photo evidence that they had taken in the house while they were there.
On the flip side of that, Weber came out, and Weber said that they actually sat down with him, drank a few bottles of wine, and concocted this whole plan to fake it in order to get a book deal. He said the goo was fake. He said it was just over-exaggerated, that they wanted to basically make a profit off of this, and so did Weber. And later on, it ends up falling through because the Lutzes realized that DeFeo is actually part of the agreement, the book deal, and they refused to give him any money. So That's how that fell through when they ended up turning on each other.
So after hearing these claims and them having photo evidence now of goo and like other experiences in the home, this is when they ended up getting some members of the paranormal community to come investigate the home. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren. Most people know who they are. Ed Warren is a world-renowned demonologist, and Lorraine Warren is a clairvoyant. They, as well as a few other psychics, end up going to the house. I just wanted to make that point clear. They're the most well-known of the people working on this case, but there were other psychics involved. One of them was Mary Downey. She was a psychic who was also there when they ended up investigating. There was another psychic called, by the name of Ethel Johnson Myers. She wasn't there for their investigation, but she does investigate the house later on and has a few experiences as well. They ended up investigating the home. This ended up blowing up a lot, so News Channel 5 actually was there for their investigation. Ed, Lorraine, and the psychic Mary Downey, they had a lot of different experiences while they were there. They picked up on a lot of things. Mary Downey, I'm gonna start with her just because she's like one of the lesser known ones, but she made contact with a bunch of different ghosts while she was there. She claimed that there was a girl on the second floor who she saw in the window, like literally right when they got there, and she was crying. And she said that she was trying to like help her find the light. She also claimed to have seen monks in the house, which is kind of interesting. She was splashing holy water. It was steaming, and like she just got like a negative presence from the building as a whole. I know that Lorraine Warren, she also saw a lot of imagery while she was there. She claims that she saw bodies everywhere and they were all covered in blankets. She was just seeing images of the murders as she was walking through the house, and she just said it was so horrific, to see those things. I know Ed had a couple of experiences in the basement. He went down into the basement with a cross and he was pushed by an unseen force. So they all had a lot of different experiences. There was a seance that happened and they made some connections with the spirits in the home. I know that not everyone felt something, but I do know that there was a report that a couple people from the news crew also had experiences. I know that one of the members of the news crew, the cameraman, he got to the second floor and he felt a sharp pain in his chest very suddenly. A lot of people were just having bizarre experiences and feeling things and sharp pains, things of that nature throughout their time. Biggest piece of evidence they caught while they were there was they had a camera on the second floor where no one was, that it kept taking pictures, a bunch of different pictures, every few moments. So it was on a timer and it just kept taking photos. And one of the biggest pieces of evidence is that on the second floor in the entryway to what was Missy's room, George and Kathy's daughter, there was a little boy who looks very similar to one of the DeFeo children in the doorway, by the staircase, and that is probably one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they were able to get. They end up getting a book deal and then a movie deal afterwards. And a big thing I just would like to say about the book deal is that a lot of people don't know this, but Kathy and George Lutz did not directly work with Jay Anson, the man who ended up writing the Amityville horror book. Yeah, they didn't work with him directly. He was given tape recordings of them discussing what had happened in the house, and then he wrote the whole book from there. So they never met in person, nothing like that. So he based it just upon tapes that he got from them. And then, of course, it escalated into the crazy book that it is now, and, like, their daughter having an imaginary friend. Like, that's very common with, like, Paranormal Activity. Once the book came out, this imaginary friend by the name of Jody became a pig. Like a talking demon pig. There were just like all these different claims. Like, George saw Kathy turn into like an old woman.
And that's what finally made him like leave,
that's why he left. I've seen your future, girl. He's like, I'm done.
Pretty much. He's like, oh crap, they got divorced.
The writer wrote that pretty much the house like looked like it had blown up, like it was a whole shit show. Everything was everywhere. All this stuff, and you know, like it was just a hot mess, and like it was so wrecked, and like they just left. And he pretty much straight up he was like, my job is just to write and like to make money, and like that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna do that, and you know, it's gonna end up being what it's gonna be. And you know, and then of course they end up making the movie, but like the movie is also based on this book that like clearly the writer over dramatized. Lorraine Warren, she did an interview, and someone asked her, what are your feelings about the book? And because you do claim that you support Kathy and George Lutz's story, and like what do you think about like the movie and the book? And she says in the interview, she said, I support their story. Out to them, I listened to what they had to say about it, and I went and I know what I saw there. She said, however, I do not in any way, shape, or form support the book. I do not support the movie or anything like that.
Pretty much to conclude that, the Lutzes left after 28 days. Their house went into foreclosure. They ended up losing that. So a lot of people say, like, that's proof of, you know, something was happening. However, I'm not quite convinced that there's a lot happening, if anything. So, to start off, I'm going to give you the flip side of this. I explained to you earlier that Weber and Lutz sat down with a couple bottles of wine, according to Weber, and staged and dramatized most of this thing because they were going to get a book deal that they ended up falling through because they thought some of the money was going to end up going to DeFeo, and they were not okay with that. The second thing I have to say is the priest who was heard like get out and stuff was actually kicked out by the archdiocese because he supported the family. My third thing is Lutz was actually a very religious man, and he very much played in the occult and all these other things. So if you so much as like, if you're going into this like something's gonna happen, like dabbling in this, I guess according to his stepson, he tried to like summon demons and stuff. Maybe your mind will take every noise you hear and everything you hear and think that's actually a haunting. So that's kind of makes me a little skeptic. The other thing is some of the reporters who were with the Warrens when they were investigating said they never experienced anything themselves. They heard other people's accounts, but they themselves did not experience anything. Yeah, Marvin Scott was actually the reporter with the Warrens, and he said nothing much happened. The movie was more scary than the actual place. Interesting. That photo that was taken of the Ghost Boy also, that was never proven to be a real photo because the Warrens never gave it up. So that photo, that has not been authenticated. So as far as we know, they could have made it up. One of the other stepchildren believe it was Chris, said that his stepfather dramatized the whole thing, and there was something, and they did feel something, and like things would move and stuff, but it was nowhere near that dramatic. The book that what's his name wrote, Jay
Anson.
So apparently the first edition hardcover, the priest was driving up the highway when his hood flew up on a Chevy Vega. However, it was later proven Chevy Vegas at that time, their hood went up opposite. So instead of going up like a normal hood like that, it goes up like this. So it couldn't possibly fly up and hit the windshield. In the second edition of the book, they end up changing the model of the car. Just saying. Suspicious. Yeah. No one else after the Lutzes said the house was haunted. Speculated in a burial ground, even though it got disproven.
Yeah.
However, they did find a body of an oldie on Ocean Avenue, not near the house, but on that street.
Yeah.
So like, it's possible. I do think something was up and happening overall. I think it was hugely dramatized by both, obviously Hollywood, but I do think the Lutzes had sat down and tried to fabricate some stuff because honestly, it's money. No one else after the Lutzes said the house was haunted. However, let's flash to another case, that Conjuring house. That lady swore up and down before they ended up selling it to those paranormal investigators. She swore up and down that house was not haunted, everyone needed to leave her alone, blah, blah, blah. And then she up and sold it. And when the new people moved in, she had tons and tons of journals about weird crap that was happening. So yeah, people lie. People lie about things being haunted. People lie about things not being haunted. As long as there's a motive behind it, people will lie. If it means you'll get money for saying something's haunted, they'll lie. If it means that you'll be left alone, if you say it's not haunted, you'll lie. Like
afterwards, the neighbors said that it was an absolute shit show. They were saying that, people were parking all up and down the road. People were parking in people's yards and just hanging out in people's yards, to come to visit. Everyone was watching the house and all this stuff. They were trying to steal literally bits of the house.
Yeah.
It was insane.
They were running up to this house and stealing the freaking siding of the house. Can you imagine us sitting right here and your neighbor or a random walks up and yanks off siding from your house? So, yeah, I might lie too.
Yeah.
That concludes what I have to say.
Here's what I believe. I truly do believe that the place is haunted. Whether it was haunted before the murders or just afterwards, I don't know. I don't realize this, but there's a lot of information about the home that we don't know. People also could have been experiencing a haunting before all of this. It's possible that they just didn't talk about it openly to the public, you know what I mean? Because I feel like people experience ghosts all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that every single person runs to the newspaper, social media, and is like, oh my god guys, you're not gonna, you know what I mean? I feel like with the tragic death of the DeFeos that they are probably still there, especially with the tragic end. If you die so suddenly like that, I could definitely see that happening, and that being part of that poltergeist activity from that first magazine. That article that they wrote where they were just talking about some poltergeist activity happening, I could see that. And I could also see what Father Ralph said, and and the Warrens and the psychics, I can see their claims being real. I just don't think that the walls are oozing goose. I think their daughter might have had an imaginary friend who was maybe a spirit that was there. I don't think it was a talking pig. I don't think that all of a sudden Kathy Lutz turned into an old lady. I don't think all of that shit. I was telling her this, I was if your house is oozing goose, you have bigger problems than ghosts.
Literally.
You should be suing real quick.
Literally. Like that ain't ghost.
That is not ghost. That you have a serious issue with your house if that's the case. So yeah, no, all of that kind of stuff, all of that overly dramatic, like the doors being ripped off their hinges and like, oh my god, the place looks like it was blown up. Like none of that shit. I don't believe any of that crap. I do think there was a haunting, just not to that extreme, and yeah, that's how I feel.
I thought this was a really good quote, and it kind of sums up how I feel about this situation. This is from Eric Walter, and it's the film's Los Angeles-based director. He says, "I'm not a believer in what happened, but I'm not an outright skeptic. I believe something happened to these people, but we just don't know what it is." Well, thank you for sticking with us. Please subscribe and let us know if you have any questions.
Let us know if you have any other cases you want us to check out. I know next week we have some like standby videos that we're gonna do that are more like paranormally, I think.
Yeah, and we have a great investigation that we're gonna be doing. And it's gonna sort of revolve around the new Conjuring 3 movie.
Yeah.
And it's called The Devil Made Me Do It. So we are gonna be investigating that case.
Tell us your thoughts, and yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.